Okay, so here's where we stand. It's a day 38 of the war in Iran, and as the whole world is basically holding its breath, President Donald Trump has just dropped what he calls a final ultimatum. This is pushing everyone, and I mean everyone, to the absolute brink. Let's dive in and break down what is happening.
I mean, listen to that. That is President Trump laying it all out there. It's an absolutely explosive deadline. The message is crystal clear. Do what we want or face the systematic destruction of your country's most vital infrastructure. And that single threat right there is the ticking clock for this whole crisis. So why this massive threat of escalation? What's the trigger? Well, it all boils down to one of the most critical, most sensitive pieces of geography on the entire planet. We are talking about the Strait of Hormuz. You have to understand, this narrow channel is basically a superhighway for global energy. Something like a fifth of the world's oil goes right through it. For weeks now, Iran has had it shut down, and that sent massive shockwaves through the global economy. So Trump's demand is simple: open it back up or else.
And get this, the deadline is set in stone, Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, yeah, the president has set deadlines like this before and then pushed them back, saying they were negotiating. But this time, he is adamant. He's saying this one is for real, this is the final line in the sand.
The language being used is just as intense as the threat itself. You know, going after civilian infrastructure is widely seen as a potential war crime because it's designed to make ordinary people suffer. But when the president was pressed on this, his response was, well, it was stunning. He claimed the Iranian people themselves want these strikes to happen, saying they are living in hell. So how in the world did we get to this point? I mean, 38 days of a brutal conflict. That doesn't just happen out of nowhere. Let's quickly trace the steps that led us to this Tuesday ultimatum. So this really all kicked off back in late February, when the big nuclear talks just completely fell apart. That failure in diplomacy was followed, almost immediately, by a huge wave of U.S. and Israeli airstrikes, and boom, the war was on. Then, in the middle of that chaos, in March, Iran gets a new supreme leader. The conflict just kept getting more intense, with strikes hitting Iran's industrial heartland, which brings us right here, to today, April 6th, and this final ultimatum. And the impact of this air campaign, it's been absolutely immense. According to military analysts, U.S. and Israeli forces have taken out an estimated 90% of Iran's ballistic missile capability. That's a staggering figure. It really gives you a sense of the scale of destruction that's already happened. And of course, the human cost has been just devastating. Total deaths are estimated somewhere between just under 4,000 and over 9,000. Iran has obviously taken the worst of it, casualty-wise, while the U.S. has lost 15 soldiers. And all across the region, millions of people have been forced from their homes. Okay, so let's zoom in on the battlefield just for today, Monday, April 6th. It was a day that perfectly captured the crazy contradictions of this war. A day of just intense destruction, but also what some people are literally calling a miracle. The intensity of the fighting today was just off the charts. A massive strike on the Asaluyeh petrochemical complex reportedly knocked out half of Iran's entire production. In the capital, Tehran, Sharif University, which is known as the MIT of Iran, was hit hard. At the same time, a huge target was taken out. Israel announced it killed Majid Kademi, the intelligence chief for the IRGC, which is Iran's super powerful Revolutionary Guard. But believe it or not, amid all that chaos, a really dramatic rescue was also going down. The weapons officer from a U.S. F-15E jet that was shot down was actually recovered from deep behind enemy lines. It's an incredible story that officials are calling the Easter miracle. Apparently, his radio call after he ejected was just, "God is good," which at first made everyone nervous. They thought it could be a trap, but it wasn't. And that successful rescue was a very rare piece of good news for the American forces. So with this threat of total destruction hanging over everyone's heads, you gotta ask, right? Is there any hope for a deal? Is there any kind of off-ramp to avoid this? The short answer is maybe. But that path is collapsing, and it is collapsing fast. So here's what's on the table. Mediators have proposed a 45-day temporary ceasefire. In exchange, Iran reopens the Strait of Hormuz. But Iran's rejection of this couldn't be more clear. They're not interested in a temporary truce. They are demanding a permanent end to the entire war. They want a full lifting of all sanctions, and they flat out refused any direct talks as long as they're being attacked. As you can see, the two sides, they're not even in the same universe right now. Now, interestingly, President Trump acknowledged Iran's response. He called their proposals significant, which, that's a tiny little glimmer of hope, but in the very same breath, he shot it down as not good enough, basically tossing the ball right back in Iran's court just before this huge Tuesday deadline. And so, the clock is ticking down, and the entire world is holding its breath. What we're watching is one of the highest stakes games of geopolitical chicken in recent history. And the question on everyone's mind is pretty simple. Who's going to blink first? Iran's response, for its part, has been just as blunt. A top advisor to the supreme leader put out this chilling warning. He urged other leaders in the region to, quote, make Trump understand that the Persian Gulf is not a place for gambling. The message there is unmistakable. If the U.S. goes through with this, the entire region could go dark.
And so that's where we're left, with this one massive question hanging in the air. Is this whole ultimatum a brilliant, high-pressure bluff, or are we just hours away from a catastrophic escalation that's going to change the world? The clock is ticking, and I guess we're all about to find out.